In response to some questions and comments, the main objective in this video is to expand and further clarify the notion that all material entities are information. If you have not yet done so, or if that material is not fresh in your mind, then before proceeding you should watch the video, Material Entities are Information. That video is in YouTube, on the CIT channel. The title and link for that video is displayed on the screen. From this point, it is assumed that you are familiar with the contents of that video, but not necessarily that you agree with it. Before continuing, recall that while the idea that all material entities are information is revealing and useful, it is not essential for most of CIT. Let me repeat that. CIT contains much that does not depend on the notion that all material entities are information. As such, you are not obligated to embrace that idea, and I am certainly not dogmatic about pushing it. That being clear, the notion that all material entities are information should not be dismissed too lightly, since its significance and implications reach much further than meets the eye. Alright, let's proceed. Two primary objections have been raised regarding the claim that all material entities are information. Those two objections are, first, the claim is wrong because matter is not information. Second, if all material entities are information, then everything is information, and the universe is just one giant glob of information. As a corollary to that second objection, some people have expressed that the claim that all material entities are information implies either a form of panpsychism or of pantheism. We'll get to that later, but for now let's respond to the first objection, namely, the claim that all material entities are information is wrong, because matter is not information. It's important to have in mind that by matter, most people mean mass, energy, or both mass and energy. Thus, the first objection expresses that mass and energy are not information, and therefore, the claim that all material entities are information is wrong. Let's resolve this objection. From now on, we will refer to mass, energy, or mass and energy, as mass energy, since each contains the other. Alright, so the first objection is that CIT's claim that all material entities are information is wrong, because matter is not information. In agreement with that objection, the late American mathematician and philosopher, Norbert Wiener, wrote in 1948, "Information is information, not matter or energy." CIT agrees with that statement. Matter is not information. To dispel any possible confusion, CIT does not claim that matter is information. Rather, CIT's claim is that material entities are information. Note that those statements imply a distinction between a material entity and matter. CIT makes that distinction by expanding the traditional view of matter into a more complete representation of reality. Specifically, CIT defines a material entity as not merely matter, or mass energy, but rather as a mass energy configuration, MEC for short. Thus, a material entity, or MEC, explicitly incorporates the feature of configuration into the traditional view of matter as only mass and energy. You may wish to reflect on the fact that every material entity, regardless of size, form, or level of complexity, always possesses some configuration, that is, a pattern or distribution, of its mass and energy, in space and time. Stated differently, any mass energy in the universe exists in some spatial pattern and time. CIT highlights that fact in its definition of a material entity as a MEC. One other critical idea in CIT is that there are different kinds, or types, of information. While an entity may not be a particular kind of information, this does not imply that it is not some other kind of information. Let's state in passing that CIT identifies three general types, or kinds, of information. Therefore, CIT's claim is that all material entities will always manifest as at least one of those kinds of information. That topic is discussed in depth elsewhere in CIT. Now let's illustrate some of this. Suppose that there are 100 billion ink molecules, and 3 observers. Those 3 observers are an adult person in the United States, a cat, and a digital camera. The 100 billion ink molecules may be used to create CAs, namely, different mass energy configurations, or MECs. Let's show 6 configurations of the 100 billion molecules, each configuration being a unique MEC. Mass energy configuration number 1, or MEC number 1, is the 100 billion ink molecules inside the container. Here is MEC number 2 of the 100 billion ink molecules. This is MEC number 3. Here's MEC number 4. MEC number 5. And finally, MEC number 6. Remember, it's the same 100 billion ink molecules, that is, the same mass energy, except that the molecules are in different configurations. Those 6 MECs are observed by the 3 observers: the person, the cat, and the digital camera. Here's a question. Which, if any, of those 6 MECs will manifest as information for any of the 3 observers? You may pause the video to give that question some thought, before the answer is revealed in the next slide. To clarify why these entities are called observers, the person, the cat, and the digital camera all continuously receive signals from mass energy configurations that emitted those signals. It's in the sense of being signal receivers that we call them observers. Alright, let's continue. The same 100 billion ink molecules had been shown in 6 different configurations. We had asked, will any of those 6 MECs manifest as information for any of the 3 observers? As we are about to show, the answer is yes. All 6 MECs will manifest as some kind of information to all 3 observers. The critical point is that a signal will usually not manifest as the same kind of information, or in the same way, to different observers, that is, to different receivers of the signal. There are 3 interconnected foundations that explain why CIT holds that position. We had previously shown how all MECs are continuously transmitting signals. As an example, let's use the 100 billion ink molecules in MEC number 2, now on the screen. MEC number 2 is continuously emitting optical signals, called light, that are received by the person, the cat, and the digital camera. Dwell on that fact for a few seconds. The question is, are those signals information for some of the 3 signal receivers, or observers? The answer is yes, these signals are information, not just for some of the signal receivers, but for all of them. Why is that? The next slide will briefly show the 3 interconnected foundations in CIT that lead to its position. Most people know that information comes in many different forms, types, or kinds. Things that are regarded as information include sequences of symbols, such as written words or numbers, records containing data, sensory input, such as a sight, a sound, or a smell, and details or knowledge about something. As part of its goal to be all-encompassing, CIT sought to identify the common features in all information, not just in a particular form or kind of information. To remain consistent, any entity exhibiting the common features of all information must then be regarded as a kind of information. That statement is a logical necessity, as a matter of definition. In that quest, CIT identifies 3 interconnected features present in all kinds of information, and that together form the foundation for the position that all material entities are information. Those 3 features are: first, information as a demarcation; second, information as a transformation; and third, information as a potential. Let's briefly discuss those 3 features, one at a time. Information as a demarcation means that information creates a boundary separating 2 domains, namely, the domain of what is, and the domain of what is not. On page 125 of his book, No Free Lunch, William Dembski quotes Robert Stalnaker on information. That quote reads as follows: "To learn something, to acquire information, is to rule out possibilities." CIT agrees with that idea, and rephrases it by saying that information indicates what is, and excludes what is not. That idea is significant, and contributes to CIT's position that all material entities are information. To illustrate, suppose Mike is told that one of his 6 friends is waiting for him in the next room, but Mike is not told which one. When Mike enters the room and sees that Jane is there, Mike has acquired information. This is because Mike has learned what is, and in so doing has excluded what is not. When seeing Jane, Mike is receiving optical signals. Whenever any signal is received by a material entity, in this case Mike, a particular reality becomes established, and all else, what is not, becomes excluded. To close this section, here's something for you to ponder. As a human, Jane is a material entity. Does Mike have to learn that Jane is in the room for Jane to be information? CIT's answer is that as a material entity, Jane is information regardless of Mike or any other observer. This is because by merely existing, every material entity establishes a unique, distinguishable reality in space and time. A reality that excludes all other possibilities for the same space and time. That statement has profound, far-reaching implications, including some that are related to results in quantum mechanics. We'll say no more about that here. In summary, one universal feature of information is that information establishes a demarcation between what is, and what is not. Let's move on to the second universal feature: information as a transformation. The second universal feature of information is information as a transformation. Let's explain what that means. CIT highlights the deeply significant fact that every material entity is simultaneously and continuously both a transmitter and a receiver of signals. Stated differently, it is impossible for any material entity to exist without continuously emitting signals into the environment, and receiving signals from the environment. In addition, while there are different kinds of signals, they all share one common feature, namely, they are all mass energy configurations, or MECs. In other words, all signals are material entities. There is no such thing as a non-material signal. These matters are discussed in more detail in other sections of CIT. The relevant part that interests us here is that when a signal, which is a MEC, interacts with another MEC, then a transformation of some kind must occur. This is due to the fact that when two material entities interact, each will always produce some physical effect on the other. That is merely an expression of the universal principle of cause and effect. In CIT, the effect of a signal upon the signal receiver is called a transformation. That name is fitting, since the receiver is transformed, or changed, due to the interaction with the signal. We'll illustrate this in a moment, but first let's identify the 4 different kinds of transformations. They are material, cognitive, epistemological, and emotional. It's also important to mention that all interactions occur within what CIT calls a comprehensive context, CC for short. The concept of a CC is treated elsewhere in CIT. Alright, so far we have that when a receiver interacts with a signal, there will always be a material transformation in the receiver. Depending on the comprehensive context, which includes the receiver, any or all of the other 3 kinds of transformations may also occur. We'll say more about that later in this video. For now, let's illustrate these concepts with a few situations. We'll use a few simple situations to help explain these concepts. Recall that we had 3 signal receivers, referred to as observers. Those 3 observers are a typical adult person in the United States, a cat, and a digital camera. We also had 100 billion ink molecules, which appeared in several mass energy configurations, or MECs. Here are 3 of those MECs. As all material entities, each of these MECs is continuously emitting signals. Those signals, which are themselves material entities, are received by the three observers: the person, the cat, and the camera. When any of the signals is received by an observer, that observer will be transformed, or changed, in some way. And there we have it. A transformation, which may be any of the four kinds mentioned earlier, is a universal feature of all information. Let's now show how the signals, and the transformations they cause, may or may not manifest as information for the three observers. To be clear, all four transformations are information, in the sense that the receiving entity is transformed from the original state, before interacting with the signal, to a new state, after interacting with the signal. As had already been mentioned, there will always be a material transformation in the observer, and that transformation is called material information. The human, the cat, and the camera will all be physically transformed by the signal from each arrangement, or configuration, of the 100 billion ink molecules. For instance, the first signal enters the eyes, travels down the optic nerve, and in a manner of speaking, forms an image in the brain of the human and the cat. That material image is distinguishable from the material image that will be produced by MEC number 2 or MEC number 3. For the camera screen looks like this before the picture of MEC number 1 is taken, and looks like this after the picture is taken. Similarly for MEC number 2 and MEC number 3. Suppose the camera is a 20 megapixel camera, which roughly means that the camera forms an image with 20 million pixels. Think of it as a jigsaw puzzle with 20 million pieces. Each individual pixel of the camera will be physically transformed to correspond with the signal from the MEC. This means that the change from the screen before and the screen after represents a purely physical transformation corresponding to the signal. That transformation manifests as material information. Let's proceed to the other three kinds of transformations, to see how all of this comes together to provide the complete reality about information. Here's where we are. We have 100 billion ink molecules appearing as three different material entities, or MECs. As all MECs, they are continuously emitting material signals. Those signals interact with the signal receiver, called an observer, which here is a digital camera. When that interaction occurs, the observer will always be transformed in some way, since it's impossible for two material entities to interact without some kind of transformation. There are four kinds of transformations. They are material, cognitive, epistemological, and emotional. Those transformations, or changes, manifest as what is commonly called information. Before continuing, let's briefly describe each kind of transformation. It must be emphasized that these are very deep, complex matters, and so only a superficial glimpse is provided here. Alright, let's proceed. A material transformation of a MEC is a change only in some physical aspect of the MEC. For example, if a piece of paper is torn in half, that is a material transformation. Next, a cognitive transformation of a MEC is a change in the perception, memory, reasoning, or judgment of the MEC. Broadly speaking, a cognitive transformation occurs during student education or training, since the student will undergo many changes with regards to the subject matter. An epistemological transformation is a change in knowledge, as per some overall formal structure. Since formal structures involve all three types of abstractions, only humans are capable of having epistemological transformations. This extensive topic is treated elsewhere in CIT. Finally, an emotional transformation is a change that is usually expressed in feelings, thoughts, or behaviors. Emotional transformations are neither cognitive or epistemological, that is, emotions are not based on reasoning or knowledge. With those definitions in hand, let's return to our digital camera observer. We had already shown that all three signals will produce a material transformation in the camera. In fact, each transformation will be different, and therefore each one will manifest as different material information. As for the other three kinds of transformations, it should be apparent that the camera cannot have cognitive, epistemological, or emotional transformations. In summary, the camera can only experience material transformations, and therefore can only manifest material information. In the case of the cat, each signal will produce a different material transformation in the cat. In terms of cognition, the cat will experience only vague, elementary transformations, since the cat can distinguish the difference between the signals, but there is no meaning attached to those differences. Epistemological transformations are not possible, since the cat cannot have an abstract knowledge base. Finally, it is unlikely that the cat will experience an emotional transformation from signals that have no meaning for it. In passing, if instead of a typical cat, this cat has been trained to recognize these signals, then the results could change. Lastly, each signal will also produce a different material transformation for an adult person in the United States. However, unlike the camera and the cat, the person will almost certainly experience cognitive transformations, in different areas and levels, from interacting with each of the three signals. Epistemological transformations also are almost certain, since the person has an abstract knowledge base. That abstract knowledge base may include the United States Declaration of Independence, and the Burmese written language. Finally, it's certainly possible for the person to experience some type of emotional reaction, or transformation, from any of the three signals. Summarizing, the second universal attribute of information is that of causing transformations. Those transformations manifest as what is commonly referred to as information. Let's shift to the third universal aspect about information: information as a potential. The third universal feature of information is information as a potential. Let's explain what that means. People mostly think about information as something that either is, or is not. For example, most people would say that a folder of a case file is information, or contains information. Whereas a slice of cake is not information. CIT takes a different view. Not only does CIT hold the position that all material entities are information, but also that the same material entity will manifest as different kinds of information, in different ways, to different entities, and even to the same entity. That concept is expressed with the following statement: information is not something that is, information is something that becomes. In other words, no information is one thing for all observers. Instead, information is many potential things that may or may not become actualized, depending on a set of factors. In CIT, that set of factors is called the comprehensive context. Thus, for any given situation, a material entity will manifest as one or more kinds of information due to the comprehensive context. The concept of comprehensive context is foundational in CIT, and is covered elsewhere. It must be pointed out that what's being expressed here is familiar to everyone, it's just that people don't usually think about these things. Let's now present some situations that will illustrate these concepts. In the first situation, a camera is the observer, or signal receiver, and Einstein's famous equation relating mass and energy, shown on the screen, is the MEC emitting the signal. Potentially, a signal can transform an observer materially, cognitively, epistemologically, and emotionally. As we had already shown, the camera can only be transformed materially. Therefore, the image of Einstein's equation will only manifest as material information for the camera. No other kind of information is possible. Let's now switch the observer from the camera to a typical dog. As always, the same signal has the potential to manifest as different kinds of information. For this dog, it will certainly manifest as material information, and possibly as cognitive and emotional information, but never as epistemological information. Now suppose that this dog had been trained, such that when it saw the image of the equation it would bark, and then it would receive a doggy treat. In this signal from the equation would certainly manifest not merely as material information, but also as cognitive and emotional information. Real-life examples of this are dogs that have been trained to sniff out drugs, cadavers, or for tracking people. If the observer is a person, then all four kinds of transformations are possible, in different ways. Hence, there are many kinds and levels of information that may, or may not manifest, due to this signal. For instance, consider the possible ways in which this signal may manifest as information, if the person is a typical 5-year-old, a typical adult, an artist, or a scientist with a PhD in physics. The bottom line is that while a signal may be the same, the kinds of information that will manifest from that signal can vary in many ways. That's another way of saying that information is not one fixed thing. Information is a potential that will actualize in different ways. The details can be complex, but the general idea is always the same, and is fairly easy to understand. Let's show a few more situations to illustrate this. It should be emphasized that the CIT concepts and analysis being applied here are universal. That is, they apply to any situation involving material entities, at any size scale, whether the entity is biological, or technological, mineral, animal, or vegetable. The essential point to always have in mind is that information is not one fixed thing. It is many potential things that become actualized in different ways depending on a comprehensive context, which includes the signal receiver. Alright, since the basics have been introduced, we can proceed at a quicker pace. Suppose the observer, or signal receiver, is a typical person, like you or me, or anyone else. Let's now show a series of mass energy configurations, or MECs, which are the signal sources. Consider the kinds of transformations, and therefore the kinds of information, that each of the signals may or may not actualize as, to the signal receiver. Here is the first MEC, the signal source. The second MEC, the signal source. Here is the third signal source, a MEC. Finally, here is the fourth MEC, the signal source. Briefly, the first MEC is a well-constructed sentence written in Egyptian hieroglyphs. In the English language, that sentence would read, "The crocodile eats the king." The second MEC is a well-constructed phrase written in Burmese. Translated into English, that phrase would read, "When in the course of human events." The third MEC consists of 28 characters assembled from several different languages. Would that imply that this MEC is gibberish? A meaningless string of characters? No, it does not. For instance, this string of characters may be a password, necessary to access a file on a computer, or a bank account. Last, the MEC signal source is a remote control for a garage door opener. Remote for short. CIT highlights the fact that the remote emits two types of signals: undirected signals, and directed signals. The undirected signals are simply reflected light. As all signals, the undirected signals are informative. They are information. For instance, those signals inform what the object, where it is, its orientation, its shape, its size, its color, and other details. The remote may also emit directed signals, that is, special signals that target a specific receiver. In this case, the targeted receiver is the garage door opener. We won't answer the questions, or go into the details, but think about the following. Why, and how, are these directed signals special? Also, the directed signals emitted by the remote are received by countless millions of material entities, but only one of those entities will react to the signals in a way that fulfills a purpose. However, every one of the millions of material entities that receives those directed signals is transformed, and therefore some information is manifested. The directed signals from the remote will open or close the garage door, but will not turn on or off a television set. Why is that? Since both the garage door opener and the television set receive the same signal, that is, the same information. As a hint, think of these things as humans communicating with different natural languages. Considerations such as these are just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. One important takeaway from what has been presented here is that while a material entity may not be a specific kind of information, this does not mean that it isn't some kind of information. In other words, information of some kind is always manifested, but not necessarily a particular kind. Failing to understand this point is the largest obstacle for grasping the notion that all material entities are information. The next and final slide will summarize the ideas that have been presented in this video. Okay, let's summarize what's been presented in this video. CIT's claim is that all material entities are information. The two main objections raised against that claim are, 1. The claim is wrong because matter is not information. And 2. If all material entities are information, then the entire universe is just one giant glob of information. Explicitly or implicitly, the content in this video refuted both of those objections. Concisely, those objections were refuted by pointing out two positions in CIT. First, CIT makes a distinction between mere mass energy, called matter, and a mass energy configuration, MEC for short, which is commonly called a material entity. Hence, CIT's claim is not that matter is information. The claim is that every material entity, every MEC, is information. Second, CIT points out that there are different kinds of information, all of which are manifested by material entities. Thus, while a material entity may not manifest as a specific kind of information, this does not mean that it does not manifest as some other kind of information. Furthermore, it was shown that any instance of information does not manifest as the same static thing to every receiver. Instead, every instance of information is actually a potential that will manifest as different kinds of information. This means that the same material entity, which is an instance of information, will manifest as different kinds of information to receivers, which are other material entities. CIT expresses that overall concept with the statement, information is not something that is. Information is something that becomes. The upshot is that instead of being a single static mass of homogeneous information, the universe is a complex ensemble of material entities that dynamically manifest as different kinds of information. Another argument supporting the claim that all material entities are information is that all material entities possess the three universal attributes of information. Those three universal attributes are demarcation, transformation, and potential. Demarcation indicates that information creates a boundary between what is and what is not. Transformation indicates that upon interacting with a receiver, information will always transform the receiver of the information. Potential indicates that the specific way in which information is manifested will not be actualized until after the input interacts with a receiver. In other words, the information to be manifested is in a potential state, until it is actualized in the receiver. To emphasize, every material entity possesses those three universal attributes of information, and this leads to the claim that material entities are information. Let's end this presentation with a few closing comments. The biggest obstacle to understanding the view that all material entities are information is not recognizing the 2 points highlighted in this video. Those 2 points are, 1. Material entities are more than just mass energy, they are mass energy configurations. And 2. That there are different kinds of information. As an example, the typical person looks at a slice of cake, such as the one displayed on the screen, and says, "That's a slice of cake, not information." However, that slice of cake possesses the three universal attributes of information, and so the question is begged, why isn't it information? Indeed, the slice of cake is not a particular kind of information, such as written text, or spoken words, or ones and zeros in a computer, but this does not exclude it from being other kinds of information. Lastly, recall that there is much in CIT that does not depend on the notion that all material entities are information. For example, CIT's views on signals, interactions, communication, language, intelligence, and in other areas do not rely on that notion. That said, the idea that all material entities are information should not be dismissed too lightly, since its implications extend further than meets the eye. We'll end this video on that note.